For those who believe in life beyond Earth, the military is often seen as humanity's first line of defense. For over a century, radio dramas, movies, and books have asked the same haunting question. What would really happen if our armed forces faced an advanced extraterrestrial species? At least two men claim they already know the answer, because they lived through it. According to their testimonies, they were not only caught in a direct confrontation, but were also abducted and had their memories erased. Their stories raise a chilling question. What really happened during the Fort Benning incident? For decades, one of the most consistent patterns in UFO sightings worldwide has been their proximity to military bases. From radar operators to fighter pilots, many of the most credible reports don't come from ordinary citizens, but from highly trained military personnel. These testimonies are often supported by radar logs, sensor data, and even cockpit footage. To UFO researchers, this makes sense. If another intelligence was studying Earth, it would want to understand our military capabilities. Even with peaceful intentions, such knowledge would be crucial. That's why cases like the famous Tic Tac encounter stand out. In 2004, Navy pilots from the USS Nimitz tracked a strange white pill-shaped craft that moved in ways no known aircraft could. It was captured on infrared cameras and confirmed by naval radar. Witnesses saw it accelerate, hover, and drop altitude at impossible speeds, maneuvers no human pilot could survive. A decade later, in 2015, pilots from the USS Roosevelt reported multiple fast-moving objects off the East Coast. They even recorded them using their targeting systems. Known today as the Go Fast and Gimbal videos, these encounters left both pilots and radar crews stunned by the craft's unnatural movements. Skeptics dismiss these cases as glitches or sensor errors, but the witnesses themselves insist otherwise. In fact, whistleblowers claim that the U.S. government maintains a secret archive filled with such encounters, hidden away from the public eye. Globally, UFOs have been linked to military installations for decades. From the Rendlesham Forest incident in the UK to Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, these mysterious objects often appear near nuclear missile silos, training grounds, and air bases. In some cases, reports even suggest that weapon systems were disabled or power grids were knocked offline. If true, it raises unsettling questions about the intentions of whoever, or whatever, is behind them. Which brings us to Fort Benning. Located on the border of Georgia and Alabama, Fort Benning has been one of the backbone institutions of the U.S. Army since 1918. It is home to elite units like the Infantry School and the 75th Ranger Regiment, hosting over 120,000 soldiers, civilians, and families. But beyond its reputation as a powerhouse of military training, many believe Fort Benning has a hidden history tied to strange encounters. The surrounding region of the American South has been the site of numerous well-documented UFO sightings, many of which occurred after the base was established, and often within just a few hours' drive of its perimeter. Take the Valdosta, Georgia sightings between 1949 and 1952, when countless locals reported glowing lights and reddish objects in the sky. Just 1 year earlier, 2 pilots claimed a bright object followed them over Montgomery, Alabama, though officials later dismissed it as nothing more than a meteorite. Still, dozens of similar reports suggest that UFOs, whatever they are, have a particular interest in military hardware. And if the accounts of the Fort Benning incident are true, that interest may have escalated to a terrifying climax on September 2, 1977. Years later, in the early 1990s, a man named John Vasquez appeared at the International UFO Conference in Laughlin, Nevada. He wasn't a UFO researcher. He was looking for answers. A veteran and former soldier, John hoped that speaking to others might help him make sense of what he had been experiencing for years. One author, Graham Birdsall, decided to listen. John explained that he had joined the National Guard in 1977 before transferring into the regular army. He was eventually stationed at Delta Company, 1st Infantry, Fort Benning. By his own account, his service was fairly ordinary. He even spent some time in Germany in the late 1970s, long after the Vietnam War had ended, when combat missions were rare. But throughout the 1980s, John began to suffer from recurring, disturbing nightmares. They were so vivid that he struggled to separate dream from reality. He recalled horrifying faces and visions of himself and fellow soldiers standing in formation, yet appearing to be asleep. Eventually, desperate for answers, he sought psychiatric help. Under hypnosis and regression therapy, John claimed memories began to surface, memories far stranger than he could ever have imagined. According to him, in September of 1977, he and as many as 1,300 soldiers from the 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment were involved in a mass abduction event at Fort Benning. Most of the audience at the conference was intrigued but skeptical. Yet Graham Birdsall felt compelled to investigate further, and so began one of the most mysterious and chilling chapters in modern UFO lore: the Fort Benning incident. After long interviews with John and careful study of his fragmented memories and therapy notes, a disturbing story began to emerge. On the evening of September 2, 1977, at around 7:30 p.m., the new recruits of the 1st Battalion were called to an evening parade. 4 full companies, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, stood assembled on the field, roughly 1,300 men in total. John Vasquez, a member of Delta Company, was positioned near the back of the formation. The event was meant to be a simple welcoming ceremony, with the captain outlining the training schedule for the coming weeks. But instead, something far stranger unfolded. As they stood waiting, a soldier beside John pointed toward the night sky. Above them, a faint light drifted across the stars. One man quickly dismissed it as a satellite, but John noticed something unusual. It stopped, reversed course, then continued forward again. Shaking his head, he told himself it must have been an illusion and turned back to the ceremony. Just then, as the captain climbed onto the podium, John was startled by a deep rushing noise, like wind howling through a massive concrete tunnel. He instinctively turned toward the sound and froze. From the nearby woods, a brilliant light was emerging. At first, it looked like a single headlight from a truck pushing through the trees. But as it grew closer, the glow intensified until it lit up the entire area like midday. Suddenly, chaos erupted. Some soldiers broke formation and sprinted away in panic. Others froze in place, their heads bowed as if locked in a trance. When John leaned forward to check the man in front of him, he was horrified. The soldier was fast asleep, yet still standing upright. Then everything went black. When John regained consciousness, he was still on the field, but paralyzed from the waist down. Twisting his body, he saw pure chaos. Hundreds of soldiers were fleeing, some into the forest, others diving beneath the raised buildings for cover. A few remained standing stiffly in place, while others lay flat and unmoving on the ground. At that moment, John's friend Alan rushed over, grabbed him by the arm, and pulled. Instantly, John felt control of his legs return. Together, the two stumbled through the madness. They could see the captain frozen rigid at the podium, motionless like a statue, just like so many others. Behind them, the glowing light pulsed brighter than ever. Soldiers who faced it weren't asleep. They were wide-eyed, jaws slack, standing unnaturally still. With no choice, John and Alan bolted for cover beneath one of the barracks buildings. There, they found several other men hiding, whispering frantically about what was happening. Moments later, a furious sergeant stormed from a nearby building, seemingly unaffected by the strange paralysis. He shouted at the recruits, demanding order. But before their eyes, a small glowing orb drifted down and struck him, knocking him unconscious instantly. From their hiding spot, John and the others watched in shock as soldiers stumbled, shouted, and collided in chaos. Then the light surged again, expanding until it felt as if the entire fort was drowning in blinding white. And that's when John heard it. A voice. Metallic, strange, yet not entering through his ears. It was inside his head. "It's okay. Don't be afraid, come out." Despite the fear clawing at him, John felt compelled to obey. He crawled from the shadows and stepped into the open. The light was everywhere, and within it, he could just barely make out dark, shadowy figures darting about. Suddenly, something struck him, first on the shoulder, then on the back. The world went dark again. When he awoke, he was rising, lifted upward. His body tingled, fear tightening his chest. But the voice returned, calm and commanding, telling him to keep his eyes shut. He obeyed. Then the voice changed. It was now female, and it asked him a single haunting question. "Do you remember?" With those words, visions erupted in his mind, images that would haunt him for the rest of his life. John's next memories are fragmented, blurred images he later recalled only under hypnosis. He described lying on a slab, lined up beside rows of other soldiers who were unconscious or paralyzed. From that point forward, his recollections were scattered and dreamlike. For the rest of his life, John maintained that he had no clear memory of the entire month of September 1977. Still, the fragments he did recover remain haunting. He recalled glimpsing two figures several tables away, performing what looked like examinations on other soldiers. A second voice echoed in his mind, telling him to go to sleep. And then he dreamed. In those dreams, he saw disturbing images. Earth itself destroyed. A pale human face dissolving as if it were made of melting mercury. Moments later, John awoke back in formation, surrounded once again by the 1,300 men of his battalion. But something was off. The soldiers around him weren't the same ones he had been standing beside earlier. Some appeared dazed, swaying on their feet, while others looked sick and even vomited. The captain, confused and unable to continue, quickly dismissed the men. Back in his barracks, John prepared for bed. That's when he noticed strange details. His shirt was only half-buttoned, his trousers undone, his boots laced incorrectly, as though someone else had dressed him. Inside his trousers, he even found a strange glue-like substance. He felt weak and unwell. Many of his comrades did too. Sitting on his bunk, he stared blankly at the wall, noticing that others in the barracks were doing the same, almost like they were in a daze. In one corner, a few men compared their watches. One read 7:40 p.m., another showed 3:30 a.m. When John checked his own, it displayed 4:45 a.m. The time discrepancies were baffling, but no one had the energy to argue. Exhausted, sore, and confused, they eventually fell asleep. Weeks later, John reported to the Army hospital with severe muscle spasms. He was prescribed physical therapy, and not long after, he was transferred overseas to Germany. The bizarre events of that September night faded from his conscious memory, buried deep until resurfacing more than a decade later in recurring dreams. When hypnosis therapy brought fragments of those memories back, John began filing Freedom of Information Act requests, searching for Army records about what had happened. What he found were reports describing soldiers falling mysteriously ill around the same time, officially blamed on a measles outbreak. Even a local newspaper printed the story. Yet, despite his digging, John never uncovered any direct Army records to back it up. For many, his story sounded too fantastic to believe. Skeptics dismissed it outright. But in 2011, something happened that gave his account a chilling new weight. Another soldier stepped forward. He claimed he had been there that very night, and his story included a battle. His name was Command Sergeant Major James Norton. In 1977, Norton was an infantry leader stationed at Fort Benning. While he didn't remember John personally, his experiences lined up in eerie ways. Like John, Norton began suffering from disturbing dreams and unexplained gaps in memory during the 1980s. He too eventually turned to hypnosis, and what he recalled was startlingly similar, though with a darker twist. In Norton's account, he and a division of troops were on the firing range during a demonstration for the Secretary of Defense, who was visiting Fort Benning that week. The soldiers opened fire as part of the exercise, but then men began noticing strange lights moving across the sky. When Norton looked up, he saw 3 glowing orbs hovering high above the base. Moments later, a soldier spotted something further downrange. Norton turned to see 3 more orbs, this time flying low, and that's when, according to him, everything erupted into chaos. Norton watched in disbelief as the 3 glowing lights streaked across the firing range at incredible speed, forcing soldiers to dive for cover. Whether their intent was hostile from the start or not, it quickly became clear. They saw the armed men as a threat. In response, the orbs began unleashing beams and bursts of light. The soldiers fired back desperately. Across the range, Norton saw one of the base's helicopters erupt into flames, crashing to the ground. All around him, troops fell, suffering burns and strange wounds. Charged with protecting the Secretary of Defense, Norton drew his weapon, firing as he guided senior leaders back toward safety. In the chaos, several rocket-propelled grenades arced through the air. One struck an orb, sending it crashing into the ground below, but before Norton could react, a beam hit him. He described it as a searing pain that tore through his uniform and scorched his skin. And then, nothing. When he awoke, the firefight was over. The recruits and lower-ranking soldiers had been dismissed, while unfamiliar military personnel swarmed the area, working quickly to erase any trace of what had happened. From here, Norton's memories became fragmented, later pieced together through hypnosis. He recalled seeing at least 2 downed craft, oblong and white in color. He also remembered unmarked aircraft stationed at nearby Lawson Airfield, with much of the wreckage being loaded inside. Soon after, he fell gravely ill. For the next 2 days, Norton burned with fever so high that doctors submerged him in ice water multiple times a day just to bring his temperature down. Along with the severe burns, the sickness nearly broke him. Norton's testimony stands out for 3 key reasons. First, unlike John Vasquez, he was a much higher-ranking officer at the time of the incident. Second, when he went public, he was still serving in the Army Reserves, risking his career by speaking out. And third, his encounter with the unknown didn't end at Fort Benning. In a later radio interview, Norton recalled a fire that broke out off base in 1986. When he arrived with other crews, he claimed they discovered something extraordinary, an oblong, pill-shaped craft being unearthed from the ground. For Norton, his motivation is simple. He says he is a patriot, and if there is a genuine threat, the public has a right to know. Yet, over the years, he also claims to have received threatening phone calls, messages he believes were meant to silence him. Whatever the truth, the Fort Benning incident remains one of the most unusual and controversial cases in UFO history. So, what really happened on the night of September 2nd, 1977? Was it a genuine encounter with something beyond this world? A covert military test gone wrong? or something else entirely? If the accounts of John Vasquez and James Norton are to be believed, the U.S. military not only made contact with but engaged in a direct confrontation with advanced unknown technology. Whether the glowing orbs were vessels or the beings themselves, they moved with impossible speed, manipulated time, and left more than 1,000 soldiers dazed, sick, and forever changed. Many believe the military recovered at least one of the objects that night and has since worked to cover up the truth, dismissing reports, intimidating witnesses, and blaming the events on something as ordinary as a measles outbreak. Supporters of Vasquez's testimony highlight its depth and consistency. His story includes elements reported in other famous abduction cases: missing time, strange lights, memory loss, physical displacement, telepathic communication, bizarre visions, and medical examinations by unknown beings. Skeptics, however, argue that these similarities make his account less credible, not more. They claim John was either confused, suffering from psychological issues, or simply seeking attention. Investigators, including a U.S. congressman, have confirmed that Vasquez did serve in the military, but official records do not show his name at Fort Benning in 1977. Some reports mention a sudden measles outbreak among troops that September, though no hard Army records exist to prove it. Still, John insists he was there and has collected documents to back his case. In 1997, he even obtained one official paper confirming that a joint U.S. Air Force and Army weapon systems test was carried out at Fort Benning during that exact time frame. And so, the mystery endures. If true, such an attack could have involved advanced guided air-to-ground weapons. Yet soon after, a joint staff panel dismissed the claim, stating no such test had ever taken place, then calmly requested that the previously released document be returned. As for James Norton, records confirm that a command sergeant major by that name served from 1973 until 1996. Beyond that, however, the trail runs cold. No known Freedom of Information requests about his service history exist, and he has since disappeared from the public eye. A Jim Norton with a matching background does appear to have a Facebook profile, but there is no mention of UFOs or extraterrestrial encounters. Stranger still, that James Norton was born in New Jersey, yet the man who gave interviews spoke with a thick Southern accent. Was someone impersonating him? Could it all have been an elaborate hoax? Or was Norton himself using an alias to conceal his identity? The stakes could not be higher. A battle with extraterrestrials on U.S. soil would be the single most important event in human history. But frustratingly, hard evidence remains elusive. Outside of Vasquez's documentation, there are no publicly available military records to support the story. Is this because of a deliberate cover-up, or is there a more ordinary explanation? Skeptics suggest John Vasquez may have simply been sick. The very articles he uncovered point to a measles outbreak among troops in September 1977. High fevers from measles can reach up to 40 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, hallucinations are common. Vivid shapes, figures, colors, voices, even sensations of being touched. Vasquez himself reported feeling ill and later visiting the hospital. Could his extraordinary memories be nothing more than fever dreams? Others raise the possibility of military experimentation and memory suppression. They point to MK-Ultra, the CIA's secret program that tested powerful drugs, including LSD, on unsuspecting subjects, sometimes even military personnel. Under such conditions, hallucinations of frozen soldiers, strange lights, and overwhelming fear could be explained. And if memory-altering drugs were involved, it might account for why both Vasquez and Norton experienced a mental block surrounding the entire month of September 1977. For now, the Fort Benning incident remains unsolved. To some, it is proof of alien contact. To others, it was a cold and calculated human experiment. And to the most skeptical, it is simply a fabricated story, an invention by John Vasquez, perhaps later echoed by another man seeking attention through radio interviews. But that leaves one final, unsettling question. If it was all made up, why does it feel like someone doesn't want us to know the truth? The events at Fort Benning in 1977 remain one of the most puzzling and controversial alleged UFO encounters in history. At the center of it all is John Vasquez, who continues to claim that the Army has denied and buried records of his service there. Is he a fraud or a victim of a powerful machine determined to bury the truth under layers of secrecy in the name of public protection? The Fort Benning case continues to haunt UFO research. Whether it was the site of a failed military test or something that defies every earthly explanation, the silence that surrounds it may be the loudest clue of all. This version flows smoother, adds emotional weight, and ends with a cinematic punch, perfect for keeping your audience hooked until the very last second.